Duke has had plenty of diaper dandies, but is Flagg the finest of them all?
You are Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome into the second episode of Locked On College Basketball Game Night, where we get to talk about the nitty-gritty of the games we saw this weekend, give you live reactions and much, much more. I'm Leif Thulin, host of Locked On NBA Big Board, credentialed NBA draft analyst, contributor on Locked On College Basketball, and I'm excited to host a show about what I love most, Saturdays, chock full of college hoops. I'm joined by the host of Locked On Tar Heels, regular host of Locked On College Basketball, excellent guy, and my guy, Isaac Schade. Thank you guys for making Locked On Basketball your first listen each and every day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Isaac, how are you?
Oh, man, I'm doing great, Leaf. It's been a great Saturday of hoops, and I mean, just chock-a-block full. We had 18 of the AP Top 25 in action today. We had 10 of the top 17 on the road, and Leaf, I thought we'd get some more losses out of that, but there weren't many.
Oh, the big dogs ate today. Well, thank you guys as well, but thank you to our title sponsor, FanDuel. From big upsets to game-winning drives, the NFL playoffs are better with FanDuel. New customers can get $5 and turn it into $200 in bonus bets. Guaranteed, win or lose. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. So this Saturday was highlighted by Cooper Flagg's masterpiece, plus Johni Broome went down with injury. So is there a new favorite for the player of the year and the best team in the nation? Let's dive right in. Cooper Flagg, that's the story. He set a freshman record for points in the ACC and scored 40 for the first time for Duke of anyone, not freshman, anyone since 2006 when J.J. Redick did it. And I was told he's not a scorer. Flagg's final stat line, 42, 6, and 7 on 11 of 14 shooting. Let's talk about that. Cooper Flagg is the real deal.
Yeah, you know, Leaf, what's so funny about the whole Cooper Flagg phenomenon is, I don't know if you feel this way, but like in my head, maybe just because of the Duke of it all, I've compared it to the Zion year in 2019 because I feel like that was the last phenomenon of this level with the freshmen. And I feel like Zion, it was just like a thing forever. And maybe that's just because he broke on to, like, in the Champions Classic, he went nuts and was a walking highlight reel. Cooper affects the game at the same level, but in different ways. And he's not really had a signature performance at this level yet, right? Like, we had that dunk earlier this week that you and I talked about was like, yeah, I mean, he double dribbled on the way into it. It was like, maybe that's something, but this is it, man. For me, this is the breakout. This is the signature. This is what Cooper Flagg needed for Johnny Q random college basketball fan to realize, like, oh, this dude is a dude, not just filling up the stat sheet, but pouring in 42.
Well, the crazy thing about Cooper Flagg is I think coming into the year, you were thinking, okay, what are the storylines of college basketball? And it was, oh, we got a great draft coming in and Cooper Flagg headlines it, but he's not flashy, which is what you alluded to. But in the top 10 matchups in which he's played already in his collegiate career, he was averaging 22 and 11 against top 10 opponents as a 17-year-old at that point. He turns 18. In his last 4 games, he's averaging 27.3 points per game, 5.3 assists per game, 7.5 rebounds per game. And then there's those flashy plays that can draw anyone because they'll be on Instagram, because they'll be on SportsCenter. And that's what he does. He's excellent. And I talked about on Locked on Duke, he looks like he's been coached by Greg Popovich since the age of 9. He makes the right play every time. And the other thing about Cooper Flagg is he might be the best defender in the country because he's so versatile. And then you see the production. He leads Duke in every statistical category. And they're so far and away the best team in the ACC. It almost feels like they're the Gonzaga now, of Gonzaga playing the WCC for years and years. It was just St. Mary's would occasionally beat them. I'm not saying that they go undefeated because it's difficult to go undefeated. Maybe the Tar Heels get them. Maybe Louisville. Someone can do it, but I don't see them losing many games. And so it almost becomes Cooper Flagg's so good, and they're on a crash course with a number 1 seed, barring disaster, because Cooper Flagg's that good, and it now takes on the aura that Zion Williamson had. where it was, oh, like this is a 1 seed, it's championship or bust now. Whereas Duke was a little experimental to start the year because of some turnovers at the end of games, because they could easily be undefeated right now. And that would mean the hype would be through the roof. Now, not quite as much, but I think it's clear that they're a top 2 team in the country. And the other team that I think is top 2 lost its best player.
Yeah. And what's so interesting about Duke, I mean, they were cruising in this game, Leaf. They were up 18. We've got just under 4 minutes to go. And then suddenly Notre Dame's like, you know what? Let's make this interesting. And they go on this, 15-1 run down the stretch to bring it within 4 with 32 seconds left. And, it never got closer than that. But it was like, how did this game get to this point? And so I don't know that it's anything I'm worried about, but it was weird that happened in real time. But you know what I love? It's not just about Cooper Flagg for this team. Come on, Maluach sets a career high 19 points in this game. It's nice to see, talking about Cooper Flagg being a legit scorer, being able to do so much. And the same is true for our South Sudanese friend, man. Comes in 19 points on 6 of 7 shooting, 7 of 8 at the free throw line. It's a double-double, 10 rebounds to go with it. I know he's not Johnny Blocks a lot, but man, when Maluach is able to bring in that level of offensive potency to go with everything else that Duke has, I know they didn't get much help off the bench, just 5 points, but man, just seeing all the support around it, this is a legit team.
Yeah, in my opinion, they've been a top 2 team for a while, and the losses were a blessing in disguise because they didn't have the pressure to be the number 1 team in the country, which they probably would have been had they won those games along with beating the aforementioned Auburn. And they have those turnovers, and Cooper Flagg since gets to see, hey, like we've got great spacing, we got good shooters, and I get to work on my game and hone the craft of scoring without drawing the double team by using his patented spin move, scoring in different ways. And you've seen the effectiveness just climb and climb and climb to the tune of, like I mentioned, 27, 5, and 8 in the last 4 games. Like that's since those games, they've won significantly against good teams. They went on enormous runs. For 12 straight minutes, they went on a 32-0 run between last game's final 8 minutes and the first 4 of this game. So they're really dominant when they want to be. Defensively, they're excellent, and their offense is just skyrocketing. Now, that brings me to a quick change of pace. On the flip side, we talked about the other top 2 team. That's Auburn. Auburn is likely going to be the number 1 next week when the AP poll comes out.
They almost blew it. They almost blew it.
But they barely squeaked past a South Carolina team that many regard as the worst or one of the 3 worst teams in the SEC. And the big storyline, though, without bearing the lead, Johni Broome went down in significant pain, ankle injury. Bruce Pearl said it's a significant injury, not just a turn of an ankle, should miss time, going to have an MRI. Auburn did win 66-63 due to missed free throws from Pringle. Tahad Pettiford led the way. How much time does Broome miss, and what does it mean for Auburn in a loaded SEC?
Dude, obviously we can't, like with rolled ankles like his was, it was one of those where it just comes down and it just rolls all the way out, which funny enough, I don't know if you saw Cliff Omori for Alabama did the same thing with the other ankle in the second half of Alabama's game. So these big men from the SEC, from the state of Alabama, got to watch their ankles. But with those rolled ankles, it's funny because sometimes it'll be like, what happened to Cliff Omori? You just run back, get taped up, and come back out and play again. But sometimes it's like, oh, this is a high ankle sprain that's going to last like a month and a half, and he'll be back in, like late February. It's hard to speculate. I know Coach Pearl said like, hey, this could be significant, but until we get the results of the MRI, I mean, we just can't truly speculate on how long it'll. I mean, I guess we can't speculate. We can't say with any certainty, I should say, how long it'll be. And it's one of those things where, and I know we don't want to go too big picture on it, but if Auburn can weather this storm and build out the rest of the team, it could be a blessing in disguise kind of thing, as so often happens with an injury.
That was exactly my next question. I said, can this be a blessing in disguise that Auburn gets better without Broome because they know how to play in minutes without him? Last year, UConn, for instance, they're different players, but Donovan Clingan missed time, and they won those games because they defended differently. They hedged screens instead of playing drop coverage with Samson Johnson, and they were more effective for the rest of the year with him in the second unit. Who would step up, I think it's probably Tahad Pettiford. Pettiford's got to score more. He led the way with 15 today. You're going to see Chad Baker-Mazara probably get fewer wide open shots and have to be a creator. So I think Auburn's efficiency, the number one offense right now in Ken Palm, probably is going to drop, but they may become a more difficult team to beat because they'll know more ways to win. Now, the next question I have is big picture. We don't want to go too deep into it, but is there one seed in jeopardy if he misses a lot of time? And is Broome's National Player of the Year contention starting to fade as Flagg puts up 42 and he goes down? I think Duke could ascertain and become the top seed, and Duke's best player could be the most relevant player in the sport, whereas it felt like an afterthought that if Broome stays healthy, he'd win the National Player of the Year for the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, I mean, one seed right now, both of those teams seem like they are destined for it. As you said earlier about Duke, there just ain't much in the ACC, so it would take something catastrophic, I think, to knock the Blue Devils off the top line. As for Auburn, what's nice about them is they've banked so much already in the non-con, and they've already banked a little bit here in the SEC. I think they are a deep enough team, and thank goodness it's the type of team, where Bruce Pearl plays a lot of guys. So, this is a big chance for Chaney Johnson. It's a big chance for Dylan Cardwell, who I know already starts, but he's going to have to do more in the front court than he already did. And so I think that's what I think Auburn will probably, this means, depending on how long he's out, will take more losses than they otherwise would have. But I don't think they'll take enough losses to affect their number one seed. Maybe number one overall, sure. But a top one of the one seeds, I don't think so.
Yeah, I think we're arguing over the semantics of just how good they are versus how good they can be. And even if he plays, I think they take more losses in the SEC than Duke does in the ACC, and Duke holds the head-to-head. So I think the bigger picture is hopefully Broome's healthy, but Duke may have a clear path to being the number one overall seed, and Cooper Flagg may have a path to being the National Player of the Year. And Isaac and Andy will have more on that conversation about Johni Broome versus Cooper Flagg and much, much more nationally on Monday. And we've got more to come, including talking about another team that I think could be a number one seed who made a statement in the Big 12. But first, a word from TurboTax. This is a message from our sponsor, Intuit TurboTax. Are you tired of the endless waiting, wondering, and worrying about your taxes? Well, now that's a thing of the past. You see, taxes don't need to be complicated or stressful. TurboTax is here to change the game by matching you with a TurboTax expert who can get to work on your return right away. No more waiting for answers. No more wondering if you're missing out on deductions. Whether you've got one form or 20, TurboTax experts give you and your taxes their undivided attention while you get real-time updates on their progress so you can focus on what really matters. You won't have to lift a finger, but you'll get the peace of mind knowing that your taxes are being handled by the pros. Ready for stress-free taxes and the most money back guaranteed? Head over to TurboTax.com today and get matched with your expert. Who's ready to take your taxes off your plate so you can focus on your day? Only available with TurboTax Live full service. Real-time updates only in the iOS mobile app. See guaranteed details at TurboTax.com/guarantees. Welcome back to Locked On College Basketball Game Night. I'm Leif Thulin alongside Isaac Schade for the second consecutive week, and we are thrilled to be here talking hoops with you on a Saturday night. And we had some impressive performances from the teams in the top of the Big 12, which we thought would be the best conference in the country, with a lot of teams that were in the top 10 coming into the year. And some of those top teams have struggled.
Don't put me in that boat. I had SEC, Leaf. I'm out on the Big 12 as the top team.
I take it back. I think most people believe the Big 12 would be.
Yeah.
I actually did a podcast saying that I don't think it was crazy that they could be, but I won't take the credit and say I was quite there. But I was lower on a few of the teams that have struggled, but not all of them. But one team I was high on, and I am very high on, had a awesome win that I think was my favorite game of college basketball this season, and that was Iowa State going on the road to Lubbock, Texas, being 3-point underdogs, coming back from behind, trailing just about the entirety of the game, and winning 85-84 in overtime. They didn't need to correct the ship, but Kansas did. You saw Arizona's correcting the ship. Baylor needed to correct the ship. A lot of those teams, top 10 entering the country, or entering the season in the country, and all of them are starting to correct the course. And I think the Big 12 is starting to move up in the right direction. But let's talk about Iowa State. 85-84. What was your biggest takeaway from that game?
They did what they needed to do, right? Like, when we get into conference play, I think it's so easy to start being like, all these teams are gonna like to just assume that the ranked number is gonna go on the road and win. But I think people misunderstand how difficult it is to win on the road in conference play. These teams know you better, even if the personnel is changing more year to year now than it typically does. And so it's like, yeah, Iowa State would have liked to have won this game bigger, but Texas Tech is a very good basketball team. Grant McCaslin's a great coach, and it's hard to go in Lubbock, just like anywhere else in the Big 12. And so, it's like, we'll take the W. Thank you very much, Mr. Jefferson, for making those free throws at the very end when it looked like Texas Tech got that layup from Darion Williams just right there at the end. But for the Cyclones, they did what they had to do, and they get out of there. Maybe a little Hilton Magic traveling to Lubbock, Texas on Saturday. Leif, what about you? What did you see from this game?
Yeah, I had a few takeaways, and the main ones are the depth of Iowa State. Because if I asked you before the season who was the best player in Iowa State, you probably would have said Tamin Lipsey.
Yep.
If I asked you entering this game who's been the best player, you'd probably say Kashawn Gilbert.
Yep.
So who was the best player in this game? It was take your pick. You probably go with Jones.
Yeah.
But Jefferson played the hero, both sending it to overtime and winning it for them in overtime. So they talked about this in the broadcast, and I thought there's an excellent point. They recruit not the most attractive in terms of let's get the highest paid guy. We're going to get a guy who played at a high major. No, they recruited guys who played on winning teams and mid majors. St. Mary's, Joshua Jefferson played a role on a winning team. Nate Heisey played a ton. Milan Monsilovic, one of their most highly regarded players, barely played in the second half of this game, and they still won. It wasn't out of foul trouble. It's because they had more depth to choose from, and they chose to play Nate Heisey, and he guarded very, very well and in crucial moments. They chose to play Joshua Jefferson at the 5 over Deshaun Jackson, and it paid dividends. So Curtis Jones, he scores 26 and 17 and 8 from Jefferson, and then you still get to their backcourt with the aforementioned Tamin Lipsey, with the aforementioned Keyshawn Gilbert, who I think has a chance to be an All-American.
100%.
And I think there's a real world where this is a Final Four team that's kind of hiding in plain sight. I know they have their ranking, but if they don't blow an 18-point lead, and I don't want to say blow as in they were terrible, Auburn came back and played great in that game, but they had an 18-point lead on the team that we've all said is the best team in the country, and they barely lost. And I think it's a really, really good team, Final Four type team, and they have a chance to win every game. Like you mentioned last week when we hosted this, Ken Palm says they'll win every game but one in Big 12. I don't think they go that far in terms of how they can extend this winning streak. But this team right now is a 1 seed if the tournament started today, and I think has a chance to strengthen their resume, especially as the likes of Arizona, the likes of Baylor, whom they've already beaten badly, the likes of Kansas improve. So Iowa State's the real deal. And I think one thing we have to note on the Texas Tech side is this game changed a little bit when JT Toppin sprained his ankle.
That's right.
If JT Toppin didn't sprain his ankle, I think Texas Tech holds on to win this game at home. Christian Anderson was awesome. He deserves a little diaper dandy praise as a freshman, scoring 18, including big shots. And Elijah Hawkins had 4 fouls. And when he was in the game, they were really good. When he was out of the game, that's when Iowa State made their run. So Texas Tech's a really good team. I expect them to be a top 5-6 seed. But I think you're looking at a team that could be a 1 seed. And it's hiding in plain sight.
And I wish I can remember who it was. I was trying to remember earlier today when we were seeing Curtis Jones go off. Somebody on this show last week in the chat said Curtis Jones for 6th man of the country. And then he goes and does this. So props to whoever that was, right? Also,
I think they're right. I think they're right. I think Malik Brown's the other one who's right there. But I think Curtis Jones is the favorite.
Yeah.
And I think he's the difference because Kashawn Gilbert didn't have a good game. Tamin Lipsey, not necessarily known for scoring, but he's kind of sets the pace, guards the best player. And Monsilovic, who I labeled the X factor when we were talking about resolutions, he was silent, absolutely silent, didn't play. But you can have the answer if you have a breakdown guy and score. And that's what Jones has been. He's the late clock guy, go-to guy in big moments. And then Jefferson can score in the post, pass out of the post, and even knock down 82% of free throws, including huge pressure ones. So this team's got a lot of answers.
And let me say, too, another, not necessarily a mea culpa, but just something to note at Ken Palm is that Iowa State now is actually slated to, things change and update with Ken Palm all the time, to drop 2 of their games predicted the rest of the way. But somebody got on to me last week. I can't remember if it was in the comments or Twitter somewhere and saying, hey, Isaac conveniently left out that Houston is actually favored to win every game down the stretch. I wasn't conveniently leaving it. I just hadn't looked at their KenPom page. But to be fair, Houston is favored to win every game the rest of the way at KenPom. And obviously, you got to go do it on the floor. But it's just something to notice with Houston, who also might be flying under the radar a little bit.
And that's a perfect segue. I was about to ask you, which team do you prefer going forward between Kansas and Houston? And maybe you can include Iowa State in this. I think Iowa State's the best team in the Big 12, but I'll leave it open. You can take whichever of those three you like and why.
Between Houston, Iowa State, and Kansas?
Yeah, it's best team in the Big 12, and maybe just talk about the wins they've been racking up recently.
Yeah, I'm not moving off of Iowa State despite what happened today. They would still be my front runner to win the conference. I know Arizona wins another game today against UCF at home. That was the last game of all of D1 that ended tonight. You know, Arizona undefeated in conference play. They're figuring some things out, but I do think, and Leif, tell me if you agree or not, I do think Arizona's ceiling is still shorter or lower than these other teams. So I would go Iowa State, Houston, Kansas, those three teams in order, which is crazy to say when we think about our preseason thoughts about Kansas, which while I said I thought SEC was the best team in the nation, I'm going to put my hand up about that, but also to say I had Kansas as the preseason number one team. So let me put my hand up and say I was dead wrong on that one.
So I had Kansas number one, and I still believe Kansas is more dangerous than Houston in a tournament setting. I think they have more solutions to win games. Hunter Dickinson can score at 18 and 12 any given night. Does he have issues defensively? Absolutely. Do they have spacing issues with DeJuan Harris and KJ? Yes. But those two are winners. Dickinson's a double-double, and they've got enough guys and a great Hall of Fame coach who's won 2 national championships in Bill Self to find resolution and find a way to score well enough. And sometimes they don't have to score. Today, they held Cincinnati to 40 points. We had teams score north of that easily in first halves today, and second halves for that matter. So Kansas can win ugly. They just have to shoot a little bit better. Zeke Mayo, Rylan Griffin, AJ Storr. I think AJ Storr finding the right shots for him and being a spark plug, kind of like what Remy Martin was when he finally figured it out after a pretty terrible year. I think Kansas is a contender still, but they have a lot to figure out. Houston's more of a regular season team to me. They're going to win off their physicality. They dominated in games that mattered. Today they killed Kansas State. They win with their defense, but I just don't think they manufacture points easily enough. So Iowa State, to me, the leader in the clubhouse. I think Iowa State and Kansas are both national championship contenders, though.
Yeah. Also, Kansas State, woof, they're not good, dude. It's bad.
And one other game that was a close finish, Baylor and Arizona State. Baylor's starting to pick it up. I don't think they're quite in the same tier. I think they're a little bit even below than Arizona, but I wanted to mention that they exist and did play a long game, went to overtime. Big 12 had some statement wins today after, we've been saying, oh, maybe they were overrated. Well, they probably were, but I think some of those teams are regressing positively, so progressing to the mean and getting better. And I also think Texas Tech is the real deal, like I mentioned. I think they're a very good team, and that'll only age well for Iowa State.
And hopefully JT Toppin is not out for long.
Yeah, and he was a warrior today. Well, speaking of warriors today and great games, coming up next, we'll talk about what actually is the best conference, like Isaac predicted, and I think many have said now, in what was usually a loaded slate. But the SEC had a few games that mattered even more tonight, including a big-time win from Alabama at Texas A&M that had all the theatrics. But first, a word from FanDuel. From big upsets to game-winning...
Go ahead, Leif. You're good. You just pieced out for a second.
From big upsets to game-winning drives, the NFL playoffs are better with FanDuel, because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets, guaranteed. That's $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. The FanDuel app gives you everything you need for live bets, same-game parlays, and so much more. I like taking Cooper Flagg to exceed the assist total. Like we mentioned, he had 7 of those today while scoring 42 points. Visit the website and share betting lines around your team or your league. Visit FanDuel.com to join today and get started with $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. And make this season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All righty. Welcome back to Locked On College Basketball, final segment of game night. And it's about time we talk about the best conference in basketball, the SEC. Alabama and Texas A&M. That was the one that caught my eye the most of my eye. I had my eyes on Mississippi State. I had my eyes on Georgia, even against Oklahoma. But the big story in the SEC is you had a lot of teams that were ranked very highly, including the number one team in the nation, which I didn't even talk about, Tennessee, on the road.
Yeah.
And they needed to prove that they're the real deal. And without failing, the SEC's big dogs ate.
They did, Leif. Also, you cut out for a second, so I missed what you were setting up there. I apologize.
Well, I was saying that the SEC is the best team in the country, the best conference in the country. And this is the final segment, and it's about time we talked about the SEC. Alabama, Texas A&M. We had a Mississippi State and Kentucky. You saw road teams really get it done. The highly ranked teams needed to prove that they're legit and get wins on the road because, yeah, they've won at home. We saw teams win at home, but a lot of top 10 teams, a lot of top 15 teams needed to establish themselves as the real deal, and they did so tonight. We talked about Alabama doing so. They went to Texas A&M. Texas A&M, I will say, did not have Wade Taylor, but Texas A&M has a excellent resume if you look at it. Alabama wins. Alabama wins that one on the road. Kentucky goes to Mississippi State, 5.5-point underdog, wins outright, and was the better team throughout in Starkville. Tennessee plays what's not necessarily the most aesthetically pleasing game, but that's prototypical for Tennessee. And they end up eking out a win on the road against a very talented and athletic Texas team, which those teams can sometimes trouble Tennessee because they can handle the athleticism. You see Auburn, I know we kind of criticized it, but they still won on the road. So the SEC, you got to do that, and the best teams. And in Florida, fresh off of winning and throttling the Tennessee Volunteers, they're able to back it up and beat a desperate Arkansas team with all the talent in the world. Arkansas needs a win at home, 0-2 in conference play, make that 0-3. Florida gets it done. Which one of those stuck out the most to you?
It's funny because we had, as you were saying, Kentucky and Mississippi State going on, and I had a little quad box with that and the Alabama Texas A&M game, and then the Utah State Boise State game, which I'll say something about as we get out of here in a little bit. But I think it was the Alabama Texas A&M game was the one that I felt like I was watching most closely, and in part because I was curious to see Texas A&M had obviously won that first game WT for Wade Taylor the fourth. And then I was like, you know what? Alabama's just got a little bit too much for him. And they were, getting out to what I thought was going to be a pretty comfortable lead, pretty comfortable win for Alabama. And A&M just comes storming back. Wildly inefficient day for Zurich Phelps. He gets 24 points, but he took 29 shots to get there, Leif, which was pretty crazy for him. With Alabama, we mentioned it earlier, had a little bit of a scare there with Cliff Omori. He comes back, he's good to go, so we'll take that. But here was the stat of this game to me, Leif, for Alabama: 24 offensive rebounds, but for Texas A&M, 23 offensive rebounds. These teams combined for 47 offensive rebounds. And also, it's just kind of a sign of the time. Like, that stat was crazy to me. And then when we look at the Kentucky-Mississippi State game, it was kind of a sign of the times as well in a different way. We had a combined 72 three-point attempts in that game. My man, so just those two statistical anomalies really stood out to me in those two games.
And they're becoming commonplace because you look at some of these SEC teams and what they're best at. They've got front lines that are enormous and athletic, but yet they shoot a ton of threes, and they're chasing the analytics of extra possessions. They try to get steals, and they try to get offensive rebounds. So you mentioned 47 combined offensive rebounds. You also had a ton of free throws shot in this game, as well as the Florida-Arkansas game. But what stood out to me is something you mentioned in there, and it's kind of small, but Alabama, we talk about their shot chart. They shoot a ton of threes. But when they play teams that are athletic and physical, namely Houston and now Texas A&M, they've been able to match the physicality, win the battles on the glass when it matters most, and they have an All-American guard in Mark Sears who scored 27. They have extra options. And one big guy who has not been playing much because he's back from injury, that's Youngblood. He was one of the best players and was a co-player of the year in a conference that had Janelle Davis, who's paid a ton to go to Arkansas. It's been a disappointment. Well, Youngblood led his team to the regular season title over that FAU team that was projected to win the conference after winning or making the Final Four. Well, Chris Youngblood's back. They lost Latrell Wrightsell. What does Alabama need most? Everyone says it. They need shooting. Well, he hit 3 threes. He hit big free throws, made winning plays. And if he's starting to get better, watch out for the Crimson Tide. And with Johni Broome rolling his ankle, spraining it badly, whatever it may be, I think the Crimson Tide might have the best path to winning the SEC because they rebound the ball. They have an All-American point guard. They have other guards that are really good. You didn't even see Latrell Wrightsell do much today. Aiden Holloway hit shots, and now they have a guy who can knock down threes to go along with all that height. The Crimson Tide are looking up to me, and that was my tonight's big winner to me because they were able to pull off the win against a team that is really, really tough to beat at home.
You're going to make me make a joke about this, but I think you accidentally just said that you didn't see Latrell Wrightsell do much tonight, and Leif, neither did I, because he didn't play because he's out, right?
LeBaron Philon was what I was saying, but
yes, I assumed that was who you meant. Yeah, exactly.
But you didn't see Latrell do much either. But they need a shooter.
I love it. I was like, you're right, Leif. He didn't do much anything. No, it's really interesting. Like if Broome does indeed, going back to that conversation, if he misses significant time, it would be it would be Alabama or Florida for me that I would probably take over Tennessee. I feel like I trust both of those teams more a little bit, but gosh, it's like I feel like I can make arguments for so many of these teams. I mean, and we've got teams like Georgia now has back-to-back wins over Kentucky and Oklahoma, right? And it's like with Oklahoma, sure, they're basically doing what they did last year where they went undefeated and fell off. Same thing this year. It just took longer to get there. They were 13-0 and now they've lost 3 in a row, and it looks like that's going to be the trend the rest of the season. So it's crazy. If Broome is back in enough time and is healthy, Auburn's still my SEC team. Without that, I think it makes it more interesting because I think there's a lot of parity, a lot of levity between Bama and Tennessee and Florida and maybe Kentucky. You know, something they said on the broadcast tonight, Leif, I don't know if you had sound up on the Kentucky game. I don't even remember who the commentators were, but somebody said, you know, who's the dude for Kentucky? Like when they need a bucket late, who's that guy that can just get to the rim and do it? Because like who's this year's, the way I translated it, who's Rob Dillingham, right? And I don't know that Kentucky has that guy.
And that's why I said last week, I believe more in the Gators than I do Kentucky in the long term, because I think they've got that guy to win games late. Whereas
Florida has multiple of that guy, right?
And they may not have the guy, but what they do have is excellent balance. And today the guy was Almanor, who hit timely 3 after 3, hit 3 in a row in a very crucial stretch.
2 minutes. It was from like 6:14 to 4:14 or something like that. Yeah.
But here's the crazy thing about Kentucky. So Kentucky's got wins against Duke. They've got wins in Seattle against Gonzaga, and they've won on the road. They've played gimmicky zone defenses. They're kind of streaky ebbs and flows. They also beat Florida at home. They had 27 from Jackson Robinson, yet he was almost an afterthought because of those timely threes from Almanor. Kentucky has a lot of guys, and you don't know who it's going to be every given night. That's what you said. But they had 6 in double digits today. They had 6 with 14 or more against Florida. And I almost think that they're harder to game plan for, but I do think in a game that's slowed down, it's harder for them. And what I would do if I'm playing Kentucky, this is just the basketball coach side there. I'm, kind of like to coach X's and O's. I would pressure Williams when he has the ball in his hands and take away some of those passing lanes because they run beautiful Princeton offense, splits cuts, and they find people in back doors and wide open threes. But you never know who it's going to be, so you don't know who to prioritize taking away. Yeah, but I would take away the head of the snake, which is ironically the center who doesn't score that much because he's their facilitator. So I think Kentucky's schemable, but you don't know who to scheme away. Whereas you box in one Walter Clayton, and maybe you get lucky. He has a bad game, forces it. Maybe Elijah Martin misses shots. So Kentucky, I don't think is the team to beat, but man, are they tough to beat. And then you look at Mississippi State and Texas A&M, the two losers of those marquee games. They're pretty darn good. Yeah. Texas A&M, without their best player, a multiple-time all-SEC guy, was able to take Alabama to the wire and do so and develop, hey, we got belief that we can win even if Wade Taylor's off because Zurich Phelps can score. We can always rebound with the best of the best. And against most teams, tonight's effort would have been enough. They just missed a billion free throws. Mississippi State had 5 scores in double digits, and their best scorer didn't have a good game, and they had a chance to beat Kentucky.
Yeah, that's right.
The only one I don't believe in of the losers is Texas. They just don't have enough chemistry. And that's why I also don't believe as much in Tennessee, because they struggled with Texas and didn't have the horses to push past a team that doesn't score easily. I hate to say this, but I said this last week too, so this is not too much. And I said this weeks ago on Locked On College Basketball with you. I said, I think Tennessee's a pretender because they don't score easily enough. And when Chaz Lanier faces athletes of the caliber of the SEC, I don't think he's a differentiator in the way that Dalton Connect was as a one-on-one.
That's where
he's a good shooter and an open scorer. Zakai Ziegler's a great player and a leader and a winner, but he's not a scorer. And Milicic is only shooting 30% from three, and it's trending downward. So I think their offense just leaves too much to be desired, and their defense isn't good enough, even though it's great, to be better than these teams who have the better mix of offense and defense.
Yeah, no, that comparison you just made, because we've talked about in so many ways, Chaz Lanier is stepping up and stepping in to what Dalton Connect did offensively. But I think the point that we've tried to be certain to make every time is that they are not the same basketball player. They don't do it in the same way. Yes, the number of points has been similar from an average standpoint, but Dalton Connect has that like LeBron physicality. I'm not calling him LeBron, but you know what I mean? Like that type of physique to just get downhill anytime he needs to. And I'm moving out of the way. That is not a dude I would take a charge on, right? And that's where the difference is going to show up in key crucial times for Tennessee when you can step in front of that, unlike what you could do against Dalton Connect.
Well, Chaz Lanier is a guy who takes one or two dribbles. Connect can play the entire possession all by his lonesome. And you say, we're going to get out of the way. We're going to play great defense. And Dalton Connect, you guide us. He scored 37 in the Elite Eight. And it was largely that. They said, we're going to try our best against Zach Edey. You try your best against Dalton Connect. And they almost won against one of the most dominant players in college basketball history. So I just don't think Tennessee deserved the number one. And this is not hindsight. You guys can check the records. Isaac can verify. But I think it's going to be tried and true that they're going to struggle in close games often when their physicality isn't enough to overwhelm. They're going to win a ton of games, but they're not going to be able to overwhelm all these opponents. Like Alabama's been able to raise their physicality level and win games against Houston and Texas A&M. They can do so against Tennessee. We saw Florida beat the brakes off them because they get 1 billion offensive rebounds. So I think Tennessee is going to be more in the ilk of third or fourth in the SEC. And that's not to disparage Tennessee. It's just to say how good the SEC is.
Yeah. Hey, quickly, Leif, because I know we're going to get out of here in a little bit. I want to give some Mountain West love here because we had the top 6 Mountain West teams against each other. But the finish of the night, the game ender of the night, Utah State against Boise State. Man, this game was crazy back and forth for a while. And Boise State had what I had hit with like 9 seconds left, what I thought was going to be a game-ending 3. Utah State comes down. Ian Martinez hits a 3 that bounced around on the rim at least 5 or 6 times before falling through. Oh, by the way, got fouled, makes the 4-point play to go up 2, and that's it. And that's all. Boise State can't get another shot off. The drama of that, because the whistle blows immediately, when he's fouled, and the ball's just sitting up there bouncing on the rim, and you don't know if he's going to get 3 shots or 1. It was crazy. I love it. But also in the Mountain West, you also had New Mexico doing work at home against San Diego State. Now we got these 2 teams, Utah State and New Mexico, that are 6-0, and the others, Colorado State's at 4-1, but then Boise State, San Diego State, UNLV all fall 2 games in the loss column behind those leaders, man. It was a crazy game there in Logan, Utah tonight.
Utah State has a culture of winning. They've won with 4 different coaches in the last 6 years and have made the tournament with all of them, and then probably will make it again this year. I don't want to count my chickens before they're hatched, get ahead of the horses, but they
don't put the cart before the horse.
Yeah, they're really, really good. And the Mountain West is really fun. They had 6 bids last year. I don't know if they get that many this year, but they're really good. And the class seems to be Utah State and New Mexico, like you said. And like you mentioned, shout out to Georgia, who won another one. And they were able to do so against a ranked team. They won back-to-back games against ranked teams for the first time in quite some time in Athens. They were at home. And like we said, Florida, we didn't talk about much. Just want to recap the SEC. This is a team that I was a little skeptical of how real they were as a top 10 team. I don't know if they're on the likes of the rest of the guys. Well, they've solidified it. They beat a team that was desperate for a win, and Walter Clayton wasn't even particularly good. They didn't get a great game from Elijah Martin. They got an egalitarian attack and found a way to win. behind it, a lot of rebounding, physical defense, and we just saw them score 100 on the road. So they can win a lot of different ways. I'm buying into the Gators.
And how about this? There are 5 teams now that are winless in the SEC. This is what happens when you start building these mega conferences. 2 of them are the Big 12 members that just came over. Both Texas and OU are 0-3. But the other team, the shocking, surprising team that is winless, is those Arkansas Razorbacks that have now lost. Now, to be fair, Leaf, they've played at Tennessee, hosted Ole Miss, hosted Florida. That's tough, but that's the SEC this year, right? And so it's just crazy to see. They get LSU and Missouri on the road as their next 2 games. Should be easier opponents, but they're both on the road. Crazy stuff. Coach Cal, 3-game losing streak.
I mean, that crazier things have happened, but he has never done that ever in the SEC since joining. So with that, we'll talk about more and more throughout the week of Locked On College Basketball. So thank you guys for joining us tonight on Locked On College Basketball Game Night. Thanks for making us your first listen. With your next listen, check out JJ Jackson on Locked On Blue Devils and talking about Cooper Flagg's history-making performance where he scored 42, a freshman record in the ACC. And once again, he's not a scorer, right? Not a scorer, right?
No, not a scorer. Not a scorer.
Well, that'll do it for Locked On College Basketball. Thank you guys for listening, and we'll be back with you next week on Saturday night.